Okay, look, I move the motion. Okay, here, look, it is 40 years since our accession to the European Economic Community, as it was then, which has now become the European Union. At that time, the EEC was heralded as a great European hope for Ireland. How many times over the last 40 years have we heard politicians extol us on the virtues of our membership? How many times have they told us about the economic and social backwater we would have been, only that those enlightened Europeans took us under their wing and showed us the error of our ways? I asked if anyone here seriously believed that Ireland would not have progressed except for our membership of the European Union. We are a nation that has always been influenced from the outside. We have always been open to ideas from abroad and looked to adapt influences to our situation. I think it is appropriate at this time, in our 6-month presidency of the European Union and the 40th anniversary of our joining, that we should evaluate where we are and where we are likely to go in the future. I think we need to move beyond the debate that Europe has been good for us, vote for jobs and follow the money. We all know now that those slogans were a con and were hollow. There is no doubt that there are big changes coming down the line in terms of our relationship with the European Union and what it will mean for us as a nation, and indeed whether we will be a nation after those changes or not. The government is content to allow the debate in Europe move on to treaty change and the development of a full banking union. Most European commentators and politicians are calling for closer and closer integration. And despite the Taoiseach saying it here in the House last June, and I quote, "The question was whether we are being sleepwalked into something like a totally federal Europe. The answer is no." But yet we see the President of the European Commission, José Manuel Barroso, saying that a federal Europe will soon become a reality. And he has insisted that the fiscal union will lead to an intensified political union for all 27 member states. And on May 16th last, François Hollande, the French president, called for a European government to be able to deal with the financial crisis, with full powers that would need, and with all issues involved to enable them to solve that crisis. So are we really to believe the Taoiseach when he gives us this categorical answer? Unfortunately, I think we should have learned by now that we can't. There is an attitude within the European elite that we should not waste this crisis. The crisis should be used to push on with European integration and the creation of a European superstate. Speaking in May 2010, the German Chancellor Angela Merkel said, "We have a shared currency but no real economic, political union. This must change. If we are to achieve this, therein lies the opportunity of the crisis. And beyond the economic, after the shared currency, we will perhaps dare to take further steps, for example, a European army." Is this the real agenda of the European elites? Is it enough that the Taoiseach says it will not happen on his watch? I don't think so. If we look at the way that this government has handled negotiations so far in Europe, it would not inspire huge confidence. They so-called negotiated a reduction in the bailout interest rate, but it turned out that Greece and Portugal had looked for it, and the government piggybacked on that proposal. The deal on the promissory note has brought some benefit, it seems, but has put the repayment of the debt onto future generations, and has also put real easing of the debt burden off the agenda. Now it seems that there might be a success on the banking situation. Government sources state that maybe we will end up with the European Stability Mechanism buying stakes in our banks, where we recover a fraction of the money that has been put into them by the taxpayer. The trade-off for these successes appears to be that we will go along with whatever integration that Germany and the Commission come up with. The only condition that we seem to have is that there will not need to be a referendum in Ireland, because you cannot trust the Irish people to give the answer that Europe wants. Unfortunately, this has been the trend with every Irish government in relation to Europe. We do what we are told, and when we are told it. And if the people have the cheek to say something different, then we will continually be asked until we get the right answer. This motion tonight calls for two things. The first is that we have a wide-ranging debate about the future direction of Europe. I believe that we need to do this because there are many things that are happening and developing throughout this crisis that are not for the good of the citizens and more aimed at the preservation of banks and the financial system. The direction of all policy in Europe is now being directed by Germany. The upcoming German election seems to be the deciding factor in how policy progresses. Where now are the so-called founding principles of a Europe founded on the needs of all member states and on the principles of community and cooperation? Since 2010, European policy has been driven by the needs of the Eurozone and the wishes of Germany, aided by the Netherlands, Finland and Austria, in the sidelines pushing their hardline austerity agendas. With France sitting in the passenger seat wanting to look like they are acting as a co-pilot, when in reality they are only there to take the bad look off Germany and her dominance to maintain a semblance of democracy and co-decision making. It is also about placing the neoliberal agenda at the heart of Europe. It had been said that this crisis would signal the end of neoliberalism and the free marketeering capitalism that it espouses. It certainly does not seem to be the case when we look at what is happening. As Paul Krugman has observed, the drive for austerity was about using the crisis, not solving it. For example, the Commission has in recent years called for the privatisation of water utilities in bailout countries, even though the Commission is supposed to be neutral on these issues, according to Article 345 of the EU treaties. And the ECB, in the case of Italy, secretly called for the full liberalisation of local public services. This should apply in particular to the supply of local services through large-scale privatisations. Thankfully for the people of Italy, this agenda has been stalled by the Italian Supreme Court that ruled that it was unconstitutional. What hope do we have of an outcome of that like that here? The recent creation of Water Ireland is one of the planks of the Troika agenda in our bailout here. The setting of the tariff for water charging and the regulation of the water market is to be governed by the Commission for Energy Regulation. We have seen how they have liberalised the energy market and pushed up the price of energy in Ireland to attract competition. What will happen when the service level agreements that Water Ireland enters into with local authorities come up for review by the Commission for Energy Regulation after 2017? Will we see competitive tenders for the replacement of service level agreements? I have no doubt that we will, and the agenda of the Troika will be fulfilled. The second part of this motion calls on the Government to use the upcoming treaty amendments proposed by the Commission to ensure that there is provision made for a Member State to voluntarily leave the Eurozone or cease to use the euro as their currency. Currently, there is no provision in the treaties for a Member State to leave the Eurozone. The only provision provided for in the treaties is for a Member State to leave the Union itself. Indeed, there is considerable consternation in the ECB that there is even this provision included. In a legal working paper published in December 2009, the ECB considered the provision allowing for a Member State to leave the euro and therefore the Union itself. The paper wondered why the drafters of the Lisbon Treaty introduced such an abuse-prone provision into the treaties. The paper went on to conclude that the exit clause is one of the major faults of the Lisbon Treaty. The paper views the creation of economic and monetary union as the irrevocability of the substitution by the euro of the currencies of the participating member states and to the irreversibility of the monetary union process. If this statement is true and the government goes along with it and agrees with it, then we are on a one-way journey excuse me, to the creation of a federal European superstate. And the statement by the Taoiseach last June was clearly misleading the House on the purpose of the European project. The logical conclusion of this statement is only that there has to be further integration within the Eurozone and the creation of a federal Europe. The only solution to the crisis that we have suffered under for the last 5 years is to create a transfer union and full integration economically and politically. There is another path that could be delivered by an exit procedure from EMU being included in the treaty negotiations that the Commission has signalled. We need to look back in Ireland to the period between 1993 and 1999. This is when the phrase Celtic Tiger was coined, when we had a genuine economic development built on having a competitive currency that floated freely on international markets. This is not to be confused with the period between 2001 and 2008, when the economy was built on property speculation and the availability of cheap credit that fueled the property boom. Such a boom was predicted by many commentators that flagged the danger of pinning economies at different cycles to a single currency at a fixed rate, and a central bank that's only role was to keep inflation down. At a time when Ireland, Spain and the other periphery countries needed higher interest rates to control credit demands, Germany and the so-called core countries needed low rates to stimulate their economies. This motion is about having options in this state that will put the citizens of Ireland, and I believe the citizens of Europe first, not the interests of European elites. The option of leaving EMU is something that should be available to us, and is, I believe, the only option that would give us the opportunity of coming out of this crisis. By having our own currency that would float with its own exchange rate would give us a tool to ensure competitiveness in the economy. The circumstances that would make the economy grow would be under our own control. Expanding domestic money supply could inflate away the burden of debt, both corporate and personal, and make our exports even more competitive, increasing domestic demand for goods and services. This would also allow the government to invest in jobs and growth for our economy. In order to do this, we have to have control of monetary policy in the state, and not be under the control of the ECB. The only way to achieve that goal is to ensure that there is provision in the treaties for an exit from EMU. If the Taoiseach really has the interests of the Irish people at heart, he will work to ensure that the treaties are amended to provide for this. We need to have all policy options available to us in order to build a recovery. In recent weeks, the President expressed concerns about the direction that Europe has been taking. He talked about the hegemonic development of economic policy in the EU, a Europe dominated by the interests of one member state with no consideration for other interests. There has also been comment on the disconnect of European citizens from the Union. This is very true and can be seen all across Europe. The policy that is being pursued is indifferent to the social consequences of those very same policies. This has led the Governor of the ECB, Mario Draghi, to declare that social Europe is dead. We have seen the massive protests and national strikes in Greece, protests in Portugal, the rise of the indignados in Spain. Youth unemployment all across Europe is at record levels, with over 26 million people unemployed. Emigration in this country has devastated families and communities all across the country, acting as a pressure relief valve here, allowing you and your colleagues the room to implement the crippling austerity programme of the Troika. The European Union should be based on a union of member states who work together for the benefit of all European peoples, recognising that it is in the interests of all citizens that the Union works together and not for the benefit of the financial sector, international speculators and a political ideology that places their interests above the interests of everyone else.
One moment. Yeah.
I believe that the government has an obligation to outline to the Irish people where this EMU project is leading to, what they see as the shape of the Union will be in the years to come as the drive towards a political and financial union continues. This debate should take place outside the heat of a debate on an imminent treaty change and in circumstances where citizens can hear clearly what has been planned in their name. Alongside this debate, the government should be mandated to work to ensure that an option of withdrawal from EMU should be enshrined in the treaties of the EU. This is the only option that will give the Irish people the opportunity to change policy and the direction that the membership of our EU is taking.